So, I'm a pretty big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. My dad collects and reads tons of comics, so when the MCU started, it was pretty much guaranteed that he was gonna watch it. And as his daughter, he made me and my mom come with him to see the first Iron Man movie way back in 2008 when I was only 7 years old. Ever since then, we've seen every MCU Marvel movie and show, not counting the shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or Daredevil. My parents have seen some of those shows, and I've watched part of the first season of Daredevil, but we haven't watched all of them all the way through. Okay, moving on. So, as someone who's grown up with the MCU and really likes it, I thought I'd review and give my thoughts on the current MCU show, What If? Now, since Disney Plus releases the episodes weekly, which honestly is how other streaming platforms should release their original shows, I'm not going to review the whole season as a whole because, well, the whole season isn't even out yet. At the time of writing, the 4th episode just dropped this past week. So I'm just going to review every episode separately, and afterwards I'll give my thoughts on the season as a whole once it's finished. I don't know how often I'll release reviews. I'm kinda in my 3rd year of college at the moment, but hopefully they won't be too spread out. Oh, and before I start, let me first say that this whole review series is going to be full of spoilers. Not only from What If, but from the entire MCU. So if you haven't seen What If, or aren't caught up on the MCU, or have never seen any of the MCU movies or shows in your life, then maybe you should watch it and not watch this until you have seen the MCU stuff you haven't seen, okay? Okay, let's get into it. What If Captain Carter Was the First Avenger is the first episode in the show, and its concept is probably the most familiar What If concept. Captain Carter, or Captain Britain, is from the Marvel comics and is pretty well known, so it was pretty obvious that Marvel was going to include her in What If. And I think it was a pretty good call to have this be the first What If episode, as it's familiar to comic fans, and even if you haven't read the comics, it's familiar because it's the Captain America story, but with a twist. If you're an MCU fan, you've no doubt seen all of the Captain America movies, so starting with a story that we know and twisting it just enough lets the audience ease into the whole multiverse thing. At this point in the MCU, the multiverse has been unleashed. Whether it was done through WandaVision, Loki, or Doctor Strange in the upcoming Spider-Man movie, or all of them at the same time, we know it was done. The fact of the matter is that a lot of MCU fans know next to nothing about the comics, and so Marvel has had to take some concepts and ideas from the comics and make them more down to earth and introduce some of the crazier stuff once the audience was on board. This is why we've only recently started to get stuff like the multiverse, or why characters like Doctor Strange or the Guardians of the Galaxy were introduced a bit later in the series. Because if they had started out with multiple realities, purple aliens, or talking raccoons, everyone would have thought it was stupid and weird and likely wouldn't have given it the time of day. So starting out with a story that we know, but changing it slightly once again helps the audience get used to the idea and possibility of multiple realities without going straight into other concepts that episodes 3 and 4 touch on. Okay, enough talking about that crap, let's actually get into the episode. So we're introduced to the Watcher, someone who says he can see all these new realities, but also says he can't and won't interfere with them. We've actually seen the Watcher before in Guardians 2, so actually getting to hear from one of them is pretty cool. The fact that the Watcher points out the moment that create a new reality, I think is a nice touch, and once again plays into the whole easing the audience in thing that I talked about. One weird thing I do want to talk about is the amount of fan service and callbacks in this particular episode. Now, I'm usually fine with some fan service and callbacks every now and then, and later episodes also have both of these elements, but it feels more prominent in this episode. There's a scene where Steve is talking to Peggy about how she could have been on the USO tours, smiling and waving and whatever, much like he does in the first Captain America movie. Then there's the scene where Bucky was saved and he says that Peggy almost ripped his arm off. Get it? Like in Captain America and the Winter Soldier, where he has a metal arm and his real arm is gone. The callbacks just feel very blatant in this episode, which to me kinda distracts from what's happening in this particular story. The episode keeps being like, remember this from the original Captain America movies? Remember those movies? I don't know, it's almost like this episode is afraid to be its own thing, its own story, like it doesn't have enough confidence to come out of the Captain America shadow. Sure, the story is similar to the original Captain America, but that doesn't mean it has to keep paying lip service to it. Anyway, moving on to stuff I like about this episode. I like Peggy being a badass and her not taking any crap from anyone. Honestly, the part where she throws a weight and it smashes into a wall and she says, "If only I could do that to Hitler's head." I mean, what a queen. The whole message of women can and should fight back is not exactly a new lesson, and it's been done better in some other shows or movies, but I think it's done well enough for this episode. I mean, it's not exactly like they can do a whole deep dive into that message because the length of the episodes of What If are average episode length, around 20-30 minutes. So I think they do a good job with the time that they have. And honestly, I kind of like the fact that Peggy and Steve are still a thing, even though Peggy is now the tall buff one and Steve is still a small scrawny kid. Tall buff GF and small skinny BF is valid. Some people have said it's kind of unrealistic for them to be together or for Peggy to be attracted to skinny Steve. But, I don't know, I guess as a girl who's not super into muscles herself, I just find it nice that Peggy doesn't really seem to care too much about that either. I will say that the ending to this episode is kind of crazy, and I'm not sure if it was in a good way or a bad way. It's been weeks since the release, and I still legitimately do not know if I like the ending or not. I mean, it's cool that Peggy ends up in 2012 like Steve does at the end of the first Captain America movie. I like that parallel. But the whole octopus hydra thing kind of feels out of place. I mean, it's not the weirdest thing the MCU's done. I just feel like it doesn't really fit with this particular story. But that may just be me. It was still a cool fight and everything. Overall, while I like this first episode, I feel like it's kind of clunky. This one, as opposed to the others, felt like they were trying to cram a whole movie into a single episode. Which I guess I understand. They needed to bring Peggy into 2012 times and basically had to go through the whole Captain America movie again, but this time it's Peggy. But as a result, the pacing for this episode kind of feels rushed, which, again, I understand, but my understanding doesn't really solve that issue. So overall, good episode that introduces us to what If is, but is dragged down by the need to constantly reference the original Captain America movies and the rush pacing. I still recommend it though, especially if you are a Captain America fan, or if you're new to What If. I'd also recommend it as a good introduction to Captain Carter. And with that, I've officially finished the first What If episode. Like I said before, I'm not sure how often I'll post reviews. I'll just post it when I can. So until next time, stay safe, wear a mask, and get vaccinated if you can. Okay, bye.